The alarm came without warning. Inside the Eagle, Neil Armstrong's voice was level. "Program alarm," he said. "It's a 1202. Buzz Aldrin looked at the guidance display and echoed the code. Through the window, the lunar surface was rising. They were 7,000 feet above the moon. The computer that was flying them down was telling them it was overwhelmed. Neither man knew yet if they were going to die in the next 30 seconds or land on the moon. In Mission Control in Houston, 26-year-old Steve Bales was sitting at the guidance console when the alarm code appeared on his screen. He had never seen a 1202 in a real descent. Gene Kranz, the flight director, demanded to know what it meant. Armstrong came back on the radio. "Give us a reading on the 1202 program alarm." His tone was flat, controlled, but anyone who had heard it knew he was asking whether he should abort. Bales had about 31 seconds. This is the story of those 31 seconds, and the 12.5 minutes that contained them, and the 27 training flights, and the spinning capsule over the Pacific, and the fireball at Ellington Air Force Base, and everything else that a man spends years becoming before an alarm gives him 31 seconds to decide. At 11:47 in the morning, Houston time, the Eagle undocked from Columbia. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin began their 12.5-minute journey to the surface. Above them, Michael Collins watched the Eagle disappear, angular, fragile, too thin for the brutality of what it was attempting. He had said everything there was to say. The powered descent initiation came at 20 hours and 8 minutes UTC. The descent engine burned. The Eagle began to drop, 2,000 feet per minute. Aldrin read off the numbers in a steady rhythm: altitude, velocity, engine status. The computer was in control. The sea of tranquility was filling the window. Everything was nominal. Then the alarm. The 1202 was an executive overflow warning. The guidance computer was receiving more data than it could process. The cause was a piece of hardware left in an unintended mode. The rendezvous radar, designed to track the command module in orbit, had been left on. It was feeding the computer a constant stream of useless information, stealing processing time from the tasks that mattered. The computer had been designed for exactly this situation. Its operating system used priority scheduling. When overloaded, it shed the low-priority tasks and kept flying the essentials. The alarm meant, "I am swamped, but I am still doing what needs to be done." The problem was that nobody in Mission Control had ever seen a 1202 in a real descent. Bales had seen it once, 2 weeks before launch, in a simulation, and had nearly called an abort before Jack Garman, his computer specialist, had talked him through it. Garman had made a handwritten cue card listing the alarm codes that were safe to continue on. It was sitting on his console. Bales looked at his screen. He looked at Garman. Garman nodded. Bales told Charlie Duke, "We're go on that alarm." Duke relayed it upward. "Roger, we got you. We're go on that alarm." 31 seconds had passed. In the world of powered descent, that is as close to eternity as any controller ever wants to come. In a conference room at MIT in Cambridge, Massachusetts, the engineers who had built the guidance computer were listening over a squawk box. The software that had just saved the landing had not been an accident. Its priority scheduling, the logic that told the computer which tasks to drop and which to keep, had been deliberately designed with this type of failure in mind. When the alarm code came through the squawk box and the go call followed, the room exhaled. The descent continued. 4 more alarms sounded. Each time, Bales and Garman were go before the code had finished printing. The computer kept shedding low-priority tasks and kept flying. It was doing exactly what it had been built to do. But the alarms had cost something. A navigation error early in the descent had been accumulating. The computer was guiding the Eagle toward a landing point it had been programmed to find. That landing point, visible now through the window, was in the middle of a boulder field the size of a parking lot, surrounding a crater 60 meters wide. Armstrong saw it at about 500 feet. He recognized in a fraction of a second what it meant. He activated the manual override and took the Eagle's controls. He had flown something like this before. At Ellington Air Force Base in May of 1968, at 200 feet above the ground, he had done the same thing, taken over from a machine that was going somewhere he could not let it go, and flown by judgment instead of by program. That had ended in a fireball. He had walked back to his office. He had flown 27 more approaches in the training vehicles until the maneuver was reflex, until his hands knew the instrument the way a musician knows a piece learned in the dark. Now, at 500 feet above the moon, he had the controls. He flew the Eagle forward and low, skimming over the boulder field at 35 miles an hour, the surface rushing past below, Aldrin calling off altitude and speed in a steady monotone. 300 feet, 200 feet. They were burning fuel. In Houston, Charlie Duke looked at the gauge. 60 seconds, he said. 60 seconds meant 60 seconds of fuel. After that, if the Eagle hadn't touched down, they would have to abort, fire the ascent engine, leave the lower half of the spacecraft on the surface, and go home empty-handed. There was no second attempt. Armstrong was still flying. He was over the boulder field, looking for its edge, looking for flat gray dust. 100 feet. The surface was moving under him. He could not yet see where he needed to put it. 30 seconds, Duke said. Behind Duke, standing against the wall of mission control, Deke Slayton said quietly, "Shut up, Charlie, and let 'em land." 50 feet. The descent engine's exhaust was kicking up long, flat sheets of lunar dust, an effect no one had fully predicted. A blizzard of surface material blowing outward in the vacuum below the spacecraft. Armstrong flew through it. He could see through it. 40 feet, 30. 4 blue contact lights blinked on the instrument panel. The probes hanging from the bottom of the landing legs had touched the moon. "Engine stop," Aldrin said. Dust was still settling. The fuel gauges read almost nothing. Mission Control estimated that when the engine shut down, Armstrong had somewhere between 17 and 25 seconds of propellant remaining. Some accounts say less. Armstrong keyed his radio. "Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed." Charlie Duke tried to answer and had to stop, take a breath, and begin again. "Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue." In lunar orbit above them, Michael Collins received the news 45 minutes late, relayed through Mission Control after he re-established contact on the near side. He said later that his reaction was 3 parts relief and 1 part something he could not name. In Moscow, Soviet state television had been covering the mission, quietly, without commentary on what it meant that the Americans had landed first. Alexei Leonov, the man who had walked in space and who had stood at the edge of Gagarin's crater, watched it and later said it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. 400 miles above the Eagle's landing site, Luna 15 was completing another orbit. It had 47 hours left before it attempted its own descent and failed. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin did not go outside immediately. They ran through post-landing checklists for 6.5 hours. They ate. They rested in the cabin, which was cold and cramped and filled with a silence that had never been broken by anything living in 4.5 billion years. At 9:56 in the evening, Houston time, Armstrong climbed down the ladder and put his left boot on the surface of the moon. He said, "One small step." He said, "One giant leap." The word he had intended, the article that would have made it grammatically precise, was swallowed in the transmission. He had said the rest of it. He had flown 78 combat missions over Korea. He had completed 7 flights in the X-15 at the edge of the atmosphere. He had flown more than 200 types of aircraft. He had held a spinning capsule together with a switch he was not supposed to use. He had walked away from a fireball at 200 feet. He had stood at his neighbor's funeral in January and gone back to work in February. None of it was the point. The point was that when the alarm sounded and the computer said it was overwhelmed, and the boulder field came up in the window, and the fuel gauge said 60 seconds, there was a man at the controls who knew exactly what to do with an impossible situation. He had learned it long ago. You fly the airplane. You keep flying until you find somewhere to put it down. The Eagle's landing pads left a small compression in the gray dust of the Sea of Tranquility. Somewhere nearby, in a commemorative satchel placed there before liftoff, are medals bearing the names of Gagarin, Komarov, Grissom, White, and Chaffee, the ones who went before, the ones who went beside, the ones who paid for the road. Armstrong came home. He never made much of any of it. If you remember where you were on July 20th, 1969, tell us in the comments. And subscribe. There are still a few more quiet legends left to tell.